Hey tea heads, this is Don from Mayleaf. In this video, Clay Teaware Brewing Masterclass. In this video, we are going to be comparing some of the main different types of clay teaware to work out their character and to work out which teas they suit the best. If at any point in time you enjoy this video, then make sure you hit it with a like, and if you're not following us on all of our socials, then go click those buttons. Clay teaware, I love brewing in clay teaware. If you've watched lots of my tasting videos, you'll see that I often brew in a gaiwan or in porcelain or glass, and that is specifically because I want to have a very neutral taste to the tea so that I can describe the flavors very accurately. But once I know the flavor profile of a tea, then I like to adapt and brew with clay if the tea suits it, because clay has a distinct effect on the texture, the body, the smoothness, the bitterness, and the flavor of tea. The best way that I can describe it is that clay adds a sort of analog warmth to tea. In a previous video, I explained this before, that if you imagine like an HD 4K image, it's very clear, it's very crystal, it's very sharp, but sometimes it can be a bit harsh. And so clay is like just adding that film element to it, adding a little bit of depth of field, a little bit of a blur to the picture, just to give a bit of warmth, a bit of character to the tea, and also just to take off some of those harder, brighter notes. But of course, you can go too far. And that's always the challenge with clay, is making sure that you select the right clay for the right tea so that you soften the edges if it needs to be softened, but also preserve the bright aromatics and those high notes so that you're not deadening the tea too much, right? So you can see here in front of me, I've got some Tokoname clay, I've got Chaozhou Red clay, I've got Jianshui clay, which I'm going to talk to you in a little bit, and I've got some Yixing Purple clay and also Duenni clay here. So lots of different clays. There are many other different types of clay out there. I'm going to be specifically focusing on a few different clays that are the main clays that are available on the market for you. This video is part of our Brewing Masterclasses series. If you haven't watched the other ones, I'll put links in the description below. This is more of a supplemental lesson just about clay, whereas the other classes are very much more general, all about different parameters in brewing. So this is a supplemental class. I've been asked the question so many times, can you describe the differences between the clays and which teas they suit the most? Right. Let's get started. Okay, so the four types of clay that we're going to be discussing today are Yixing Purple clay, Chaozhou Red clay, Tokoname Red clay, and Jianshui Purple clay. These are brand new in stock. These are our pixel square range, specially commissioned Jianshui teaware. If you've not seen the video that we've done visiting Jianshui so that you can see how these pots and teaware are made, then I'll put a link in the description below and a card will pop up here. So let's quickly talk about Jianshui, just to introduce you to Jianshui clay, and then we'll get on with the comparison. Jianshui clay comes from Jianshui in Yunnan province in China. Jianshui has its own tradition of clayware making, a very particular style, and you can really feel it in the pots. The pots just have a very different feel to your Chaozhous and your Yixings. They feel more sturdy, a little bit more tough. The walls are definitely thicker than your Chaozhou and your Yixing. They're formed on a potter's wheel, just like Chaozhou, but unlike Yixing. And then after it's been formed, it's then shaped to really fine-tune the teaware, and then it goes to the illustrators. Now, I felt that the Jianshui tradition of illustration was a little bit, for me, a little bit boring. It was very traditional, lots of flowers, calligraphy, things like that. I didn't really feel that I was drawn to it, which is why we got these pixel square designs specially commissioned for us. I know it's going to be a little bit divisive. I'm sure some people will love it and others will not love it. But I really like this very graphic, minimal design, and it just suits for me the look of the teaware. Very important to note, these are not painted on. The illustrations are not painted on. They're first sketched on, and then the clay is engraved out, and then colored slip inlay clay is placed inside the engraving. So this is actually colored clay which has been inset into the original clay and then fired together and then polished off. So you can see that this is not painted, it's not going to fade, and it's going to, in fact, I've been told that it may even brighten with age. After the firing process, the Teaware comes out a sort of metallic grey colour, not particularly good looking, and then it's sanded down to a black colour. If you want, you can further sand it to a sort of mahogany brown colour. And what we specially asked the Jianshui masters to do for us is sort of half sand it. So it is, if you look, it is brown, but there's still got a little bit more of those flecks of the black as well coming through. So it has a very sort of artisan look to it, in my opinion. So we've got these three. We've got the dragon egg, we've got the big bottom, and we've got the dome shaped Teaware, all with different pixel square designs with that blue and yellow, which I saw in Jianshui, and I really fell in love with this color combination of blue, yellow, and this half sanded color. If you've seen the video, you'll see when I'm at the master's place, it catches my eye, the blue and the yellow combination. We've also got matching cups made up. So we've got our dragon egg cup, and we've got our big sip cup. I personally feel that the big sip cup works very well with the big bottom pot, and this egg-shaped cup works very well with these two. But then, of course, that is entirely up to you. If you're interested in picking these up, then you can make that decision. By the way, the blue here on the production models is the same blue as this teapot here. This is the sample that I was given, and the blue is slightly lighter. So if you're wondering why the blues and the yellows aren't matching exactly, it's simply because this is a sample. But if you get a cup, it will match the same colors as the pot. So these are the Jianshui pots. I'm going to quickly show you the pour on it. I'm not going to discuss much more about these pots. I really want to get on with the comparison. But what I love about these pots is, first of all, the chunkiness, the sturdiness of these pots. I really like that. They just feel like unbreakable. Don't test it, but they definitely feel very, very sturdy. And you can see the pour on it is very smooth and also very, very fast. This is what I like. Very fast pouring. I'll show you on all of them. Super fast pouring. So you can really get accurate brew times with these pots. Right. Now what we're going to do is we're going to compare the different pots. Which one are we going to use? Let's use the dome shaped. So I'm going to put these down now. So we're going to use the dome shaped. We're going to use the Yixing. We're going to use the gourd shaped Master Wu Chaozhou pot. I've done videos about this. I'll put a link in the description below. And we're going to do the Tokoname red clay as well, Kyushu. I've done videos about this. I'll put links in the description below. Okay, right. For me, there are two factors to consider when thinking about clayware. The first is the heat retention. In other words, how well it holds heat, because that's going to affect how it brews the tea. In other words, how consistent the temperature is of the brewing water. The second factor is how the minerals in the clay shape and affect the texture, body, finish, and taste of the tea. Right, first of all, heat retention. So what I've done last night is I sat down and I measured the heat retention of each of these clays. I'll tell you how I did that so you can recreate it if you would like to. I took boiling point water, so 210 degrees Fahrenheit, as close to 100 degrees Celsius as possible. I filled up one pot at a time with the boiling water and then doused it and covered it in boiling water and left it for a minute. What we're trying to do is allow the water to heat up the teaware because, as we know, clay has a longer heat retention compared to porcelain and glass. But the counter to that is that it takes longer for it to heat up. So you need, when you're using clay in your brewing, to make sure that you really take your time to heat up the teaware. Otherwise, you're not going to get the best out of the brew. So heat it up, each pot, one at a time for a minute. After that, I poured off the water and immediately filled the pot again with boiling water, put a temperature probe in the water and covered the lid as best as I could. Obviously, with the temperature probe in, there's going to be a little bit more of a gap. So the graph that you're about to see may actually be a little bit more on the steep side because there's a slight gap where there's going to be more heat escaping. Let me show you the graph that we created yesterday. As you can see, we've got Yixing, Jianshui, Chaozhou and Tokoname clays all graphed out. What I did was take a temperature measure every 10 seconds after filling, and you can see how the temperature falls. And as you can see, Chaozhou and Tokoname clay, so the red clays, definitely have a much steeper gradient. In other words, the temperature dissipates much more quickly. Now, as I said, I'm not sure if that's specifically to do with the clay, the minerals in the clay, the firing of the clay, or the thickness and thinness of the walls, because these are definitely thinner. But in general, the character of these Chaozhou and Tokoname clay pots are always going to be the same. They're always going to be slightly thinner. So it's almost irrelevant to figure out the reason right now. Instead, let's just focus on the actual experience. Chaozhou red clay, Tokoname red clay dissipates heat much quicker than the Jianshui clay and the Yixing clay. And you can see from our experiments that the Yixing clay had the best temperature retention. In other words, it just held the temperature much better than all of the others. And the Jianshui was similar, but was kind of in between the Chaozhou and the Tokoname and the Yixing. So there you go. Heat retention is the best in the Yixing Purple clay. The Jianshui is similar, but is a little bit steeper. And then the Chaozhou and the Tokoname were very, very similar in terms of their gradient at dissipating heat. You'll also notice that the starting temperature is different between them, right? So you can see that the Jianshui seemed to have the highest temperature. Now, they were all filled with the same temperature water, boiling point water. My only explanation from this, and these are averages, okay, so we did this a few times and took the average. My only comment here was, my thinking is that because the Yixing clay has the best temperature retention, it also takes the longest to heat up. So you may want to leave the Yixing for maybe 2 minutes with boiling water and just keep pouring boiling water over the top of it to really bring it up to temperature. I think if we did that, you would probably start to match similar starting temperatures as the Jianshui. And in my opinion, that low starting temperature for the Tokoname clay really demonstrates that even after the first 10 seconds after filling, it loses a lot of heat. I've just said that the Yixing clay has the best heat retention, but that doesn't mean it's the best for all types of tea, because certain teas actually prefer a faster dissipation of heat. I'm going to be doing a complete geeky masterclass all about heat retention and brewing gradients in the future, so you can look forward to that one. But I want to give you a quick overview. So let's take a look at this chart here. Now, for me, the key defining factor as to whether or not a tea suits a very stable temperature, brewing temperature, is how penetrable those leaves are. So if you get leaves that are big, so for example with Wuyencha or with Sheng PuErh or raw PuErh, or you have like white teas with lots of buds, and so the buds are kind of hairy and armored, those leaves take a lot of energy for the water to penetrate into the leaves to get a good extraction, and therefore holding the temperature at the right level. It doesn't have to be super hot. You can set your temperature accordingly, but holding it at that level as long as possible is going to give you a better extraction out of your tea. So if you look at this chart, what I've done here is I've said that raw PuErh or Sheng PuErh, because it's larger leaves, I think it suits a good heat retention, which is why I've given green lights to Yixing and Jianshui, yellow for Chaozhou because it does dissipate, but not as much as Tokoname. Tokoname dissipates, well, similar gradient, but with that starting temperature being lower, it doesn't suit those teas which require hotter beginning temperatures. Followed by Shu PuErh, very, very simple, in fact, identical. Shu PuErh likes to have hot temperature starting point and a consistent retention of temperature. Black tea is very different. Black tea is much more a type of tea which you want to protect the high bright notes in the tea, and it's more delicate in terms of a tea because it's using top leaves, and because it's using that picking, the leaves are more delicate and therefore they don't need such a consistent temperature. In fact, in my opinion, the flavor profile benefits from having faster heat dissipation, which is why I've given Chaozhou and Tokoname the green and the yellow, and the Jianshui and Yixing gets brown, which is like not very suitable. Wuyancha is made from much bigger leaves and they want a higher starting temperature. So very similar to your raw and ripe PuErh. Dansong teas, they're a little bit more delicate, right? The leaves are slightly smaller. It's less oxidized. It's a little bit more green. Now you've got to be careful. By having a temperature which is too consistent for too long, you're going to start to bring out too much of the bitterness potentially in the tea, and you're going to be rounding off those top notes. So I don't think that Yixing and Jianshui in terms of brewing heat retention is a good thing for Dansong teas. I do think that Chaozhou and Tokoname would be. Green oolongs are similar to Dansong, even more delicate, I would say. You want to be very careful. You want to have a lower, maybe a slightly lower starting temperature, but you definitely want the gradient to drop off quickly so you can preserve those high notes. For green teas, even more important that we have a fast gradient, and you don't want a high starting temperature. You want the temperature of the water to dissipate quite quickly and for the water to be relatively cool. So none of those clays get the green light, but if you're going to pick a clay, I would pick Chaozhou or Tokoname, excuse me. Finally, white teas, because they are made generally with more buds and large leaves, again, you want that more consistent heat to penetrate those leaves, and therefore Yixing and Jianshui are going to be great. Chaozhou is going to be pretty good, and Tokoname is last on the list for me for white teas. Okay, so that's heat retention. As I said, I'm going to do a much geekier video all about heat retention in the future. What I want to focus on right now is how the minerals in these different clays affect the taste and texture of the tea. This is the key part of it. Now, people talk about the seasoning of a teapot, which is basically, for those of you who don't know, because these are unglazed, they're porous, they are going to slowly, over time, pick up some of the essential oils and compounds that exist in the tea, and you're going to start to season or cure the teapot so it starts to kind of have its own flavor. For me, as I've said in many videos, the seasoning effect of clay teaware is not that important. Yes, it's nice to season teaware, but I personally think that the most important factor in clay teaware is the direct effect that the minerals have on your tea. And mixing teas in one pot for me is not a big deal. I actually quite like it. I call them all-star pots because they can be used. First of all, you're maximizing the use of your pot. And secondly, what's wrong with mixing a few different teas, even if it very subtly seasons the pot? Having your own kind of custom blends of all the teas that you love, seasoning the pot isn't necessarily a bad thing. So I wouldn't get too precious about teapot seasoning at all. In fact, I would say grab yourself an all-star pot, use it use it as much as possible. And then obviously, if you want to invest in individual pots for individual tea types, you can do that in the future. But as I said, most important is how the minerals shape and affect the quality of the tea. And for me, there are 5 different effects that clay has on the tea experience, and they all do them differently. Let's go through them. The first is thickness, adding thickness. Clay definitely adds thickness and body to the texture of your tea. It also softens astringency. It also can reduce the bitterness in tea, and it can add minerality to tea. This is where the minerals in the clay actually start to flavor the tea. They add flavor to the tea. And you can get minerals that match the flavor of the tea, and you can get minerals which don't match the flavor of tea. A very common theory is that the minerals in the clay will best suit teas which are grown in similar soil. In other words, the minerals in the soil which affect the flavor of the tea. If you get clay from similar soil and you get similar minerality, then you get a mineral matching, and that helps and accentuates the desirable flavors in the tea. We're going to test that in a little bit. And lastly, the brightness. Now, this is very important. As I said before, clay has this sort of softening, warming effect, and it takes off some of the aggressive notes of a tea, but it can be too much. And so you've got to be very careful that you don't take off too much of the brightness in the aromatics of the tea. In terms of thickness, the Yixing pot will give you the most thickening effect, followed by the Jianshui, followed by the Chaozhou, followed by the Tokoname. For me, the Tokoname adds some thickness, but not much at all. If you look at the softening effect, it's very, very much the same thing. Yixing will have the most softening effect. Jianshui will have the next. Chaozhou and Tokoname, for me, have similar softening effects. And what I mean by that is that if a tea has astringency and dryness, brewing it in clay is going to reduce that astringency to a degree. Next up, bitterness reduction. Again, exactly the same as softening. In fact, usually bitterness and astringency come as one parcel. So Yixing will have the highest amount of attenuation or reduction of bitterness, followed by the Jianshui, and then the Chaozhou and Tokoname are pretty similar. Now we're going to talk about adding minerality, and here for my tests, the Yixing and the Chaozhou add the most amount of minerality to the tea. In other words, they add more of their own flavor to the tea than the Jianshui and the Tokoname. These will add minerality too, but they're a little bit more transparent in their flavor profile. And finally, brightness. This is pretty much the inverse of the thickness and softening. The more you thicken a tea, the more you soften it, the more you're going to shave off those bright notes. So Yixing is going to have the most effect on the brightness. It's going to make the flavor profile much more muted in terms of its brightness, followed by Jianshui, followed by these guys here, which will preserve the most about brightness. So as an overall, what we found is that Yixing has a very softening and rounding effect. It will change flavor a lot with minerality, but it will lose a lot of the bright notes. Jianshui has a softening and rounding effect, not quite as much as Yixing, but definitely there. It's more transparent in taste though. Chaozhou has a slight softening and rounding effect, less than Jianshui and Yixing, and it will change the flavor a lot with its minerality, and it will preserve brightness. And finally, the Tokoname clay has the least softening and rounding, but again, it will preserve the brightness and it will change the flavor, but it's more transparent than the Chaozhou. Right, how did I come up with these conclusions? Let me quickly give you an example of what we do in order to assess all of these flavor profiles. I've done it in previous videos. I'm not going to do it through all of the different teas that we're tasting. Let me just heat up the temperature here. But I'm going to show you with one type of tea. Let's see, what are we going to do it with? Let's do it with the Wui Yancha. So here is a Wui Yancha. This is Empress Oolong, Da Hong Pao. Now, the shaping mineral effect on the tea is almost instantaneous. You don't have to brew it. in the teaware. You can brew it in porcelain, get a sort of naked, transparent taste to compare with, and then pour your brews into the clay and it will react instantly. This is the best way for you to assess how the clay shapes the flavor and texture of the tea. So what I'm going to do here, I'm not going to do a full tasting here of this tea. I'm just going to move quite quickly. We're going to put this Wu Yancha into our blue porcelain Gaiwan, which of course is glazed and therefore transparent, so it's not going to be having any effect, which is why I always taste teas in porcelain first, so you get to know the character of the tea. And then once we've brewed it, we're going to pour it into each of these clay pots and we're going to see the difference. Now, bear in mind here that I'm not brewing the tea in these pots, so we're not taking into account any of the brewing heat retention discussion that we talked about earlier. That's a different discussion. So we have to separate the two. There's the heat retention side of it when you brew in the pot, and then there's simply the shaping of the quality of the tea by the clay itself, right? So it's very important that we separate the two so we get an accurate idea of the different character. And if you like, for example, the effect that the mineral has on the shaping, but you don't want to brew in the pot because, for example, the heat retention isn't exactly what you want for the tea, that's where the clay cups come in, because you can brew in porcelain, so you can get the right gradient on heat retention, but then pour it into the cups to get the softening effect, okay? So it's good to think of them separately. Right, this is now up to boiling point. Okay, so brewed this now. Here we go. What you then do is you make sure you charge your glass with some of the transparent tea, and then we are going to pour a little bit into each one of these pots. Here we go. Move this out of the way. Master Wu Chaozhou. By the way, it's important to note that when I did the temperature retention test, I used teaware that was all the same size, so the same capacity. So I wasn't using larger and smaller ones because obviously that would have affected the results. So now we put these on. Now let's taste the naked transparent Empress Oolong. Lovely. Got the roast. The roast is restrained. I'm still getting a lot of those bright notes. I'm getting the dried fruits, the cranberries, the red fruits, but dried red fruits, which is characteristic for me of a really good yancha. Is you want the depth, the warmth of the roast, but you also want those nice fruity notes, not fresh fruit, but dried fruit, a little bit of cranberry, a little bit of red currant, dried though. And I'm getting a dry finish, a nice dry finish, a little catching sensation on my throat, more than I would necessarily want, a little bit of a scratchy kind of sensation. Okay, let's go through it. We're going to start with Yixing. So all you need to do is leave it for about 10 seconds. Now, of course, the temperature is going to drop because I didn't heat these up. Ideally, heat these up beforehand. I don't have time to do that with you guys, but if you can, heat it so you have a consistent temperature. Super thick, much thicker. The texture, that catching sensation, has almost disappeared. In fact, I think all I'm feeling is the residual from the first transparent tea that I tasted. That is super soft, very syrupy, very, very thick. However, for me, the top note, those dried fruit notes, have been shaved off a little bit too much. Next, we do the Jianshui. Thicker, but not as thick as the Yixing. Not as syrupy, but still has added thickness, has reduced astringency, but more of a preservation of the top notes. Much more of a preservation of the top notes. So again, this transparency of flavor, less of a shaving off of the top notes, is what I noticed with the Jianshui, with the Chaozhou. Tons of minerality. So rock oolongs have this already very mineral finish to them. It's all about that very specific rock rime effect. I've done a video about rock rime or yenyun. I'll put a link in the description below. So you're looking for that minerality, but what I'm noticing is that the Chaozhou adds more minerality, adds a lot more, and the minerality matches. Now, this is something that I've noticed, and we're going to go through all of the different teas, but I've really noticed, I didn't really believe this theory that, you know, the minerals that the plant is growing from should match the minerals in the clay. I thought, like Jianshui is very far away from a lot of Yunnan PuErh tea growing, so I didn't think that that was valid. However, having done these tests, I can tell you that the minerals in the Chaozhou work very well with teas that come from Guangdong and Fujian, which is around the area where Chaozhou is. And the Jianshui really works well with Yunnan teas, and the Tokoname, I have to say, works very well with Japanese teas. We're going to go through that in a second. But with the Chaozhou, added minerality, preserved top notes, I'm getting as pretty much the same amount of those bright, dried fruit notes as I was getting in the transparent cup. However, not as thick, a little bit thinner. So it's a kind of toss-up in terms of choosing. Do you want to sacrifice the top notes but have thicker, or do you want this one here, which is going to have more of those bright top notes but is going to be thinner? And then finally, we have the Tokoname, which is similar to the Chaozhou, but for me, the minerals mismatch. The minerals in this clay, the additional flavoring that those minerals give, don't quite match the flavor profile. It's not bad, but it just doesn't quite match it, and it's definitely the thinnest of them all. So this is what I've done. I've gone through each of the different types of tea that we've got listed, and I did this exact tasting, obviously taking a little bit more time than right now. Let me give you my conclusions on this chart here. So let's go through them one by one. Raw PuErh. For me, raw PuErh really worked best with Yixing clay. The minerals in the Yixing clay seemed to really match, but also Sheng PuErh, because it's made from the Assamica variety, those bigger leaf tea trees, they have more astringency, they have more tendency for bitterness. So I wanted the fullest amount of softening and thickening and reduction of bitterness, and the Yixing certainly came up trumps for that one. Jianshui was excellent, more transparent, a little bit more balanced, but softened out the astringency, softened out the dryness, softened out the bitterness in the tea really, really well. Not as much as the Yixing, but very good, which is why it gets a yellow. The Chaozhou and the Tokoname, for me, didn't soften the tea enough. If we're brewing in clay, now obviously it softened it more than in porcelain, but if we are going to choose a clay pot, then I would say that they didn't soften it enough and they didn't add enough thickness to the tea compared with the purple clays. And I have to say that the minerals in those red clays didn't match the taste that I was going for, I was looking for in raw PuErh. Moving on to ripe PuErh, this is where Jianshui comes out on top. It made the sweetest tea, the right balance of softness and thickness and sweetness without taking away some of those brighter notes that you do look for in a ripe PuErh tea. Second place were the Yixing clay pot and the Chaozhou clay pot. I would say that if you're looking for a very soft, very velvety cooked PuErh, I would go for Yixing. If you're looking for something a little bit more punchy, a little bit more spiky, to kind of break out those more herbaceous notes in the tea, then Chaozhou is good, but you're going to definitely get a thinner brew. And I did not find that the Tokoname clay worked in terms of the minerals that were in that clay compared with the flavor of the tea. Black teas, there is no winner for black teas. There's nothing that I would say definitely you need to brew black teas in any of these clays. Now for me, Duenni clay, which is that yellow clay from Yixing, I really like that for black teas. But we were testing these four types of clay, And so for me, I would say black tea worked best in the Jianshui clay. It was the most sweet, it was the most transparent. I felt that the Yixing clay really took away too much of the brightness of a black tea, those floral notes, those slightly fruity notes that you're looking for in a black tea. And I felt that the Chaozhou clay, again, the minerality didn't work. It gave too much of a clay taste. And for the Tokoname clay, I felt it made a very flat tea. In fact, it was worse for me than having tea just in a porcelain brew and porcelain cup. Moving on to Wu Yanchas. You want to preserve the bright notes, as I just showed you here. You want to preserve those fruity notes, and therefore the Jianshui clay and the Chaozhou clay come out on top. Choosing between them, again, is very difficult. If you want to add a little bit more kind of spikiness and a bit more of the minerality to your rock oolong, then the Chaozhou clay is the way to go. If you prefer to go for a softer, more syrupy brew, then the Jianshui would work. Yixing took too much off those top notes, and the Tokoname was, again, pretty uninspiring. Dansong is famous for brewing in Chaozhou, and again, have to say, with my blind tastings, it definitely was the case. The Chaozhou clay, the mineralities in that clay just match perfectly, and this is a case where it is from pretty much the same area. The Chaozhou minerals just seemed to absolutely sing and chime with the minerals in the Dansong tea, and it really, really worked. Jianshui was pretty close, I have to say, but the minerals in the clay didn't quite accentuate the taste in the Dansong that I was looking for. Tokoname was pretty good, I have to say, and the Yixing was the least good, again, losing too much of the brightness. Again, the same thing with green oolongs. With green oolongs, you're looking for those more bright, light notes. The Yixing kills off so much of that. I would not advise using Yixing clay for green oolongs. The Jianshui, I have to say, was the best, although I don't think that there was any particular clay that really worked amazingly for green oolongs. Jianshui was the best simply because it was the most transparent, and it just added softness and a slight thickening of the tea. Moving on to green teas, and this is where the Tokoname clay really comes into its own. As we all know, Japan is famous for its green teas, and you can understand why this clayware has been chosen specifically for green teas. The minerals seem to match green teas. The level of attenuation of the bright notes was very, very subtle, so you really kept all of those bright, fresh notes in green tea. I really loved the Tokoname, and I have to say my big surprise here was that green teas, in terms of mineral shaping, seem to work very well in Yixing and the Jianshui. The reason is because the change was so extreme, it softened it so much, it became almost a different tea. It started to taste much more like starchy notes. It tasted sweeter, it tasted a little bit more like pandan or ricey notes. So it was very different. If you're looking for a green tea that's your start of the day, bracing, bright and fresh, then definitely don't brew it or don't let it touch Yixing or Jianshui. You're just going to brew in Tokoname clay. But if you want something that's a bit warmer, you're going to sacrifice a lot of those bright notes, but you want something that's sweeter and starchier. I actually think Jianshui worked really well, specifically for the Chinese green teas. I definitely think that, and again, a big surprise to me, that the Chaozhou Red clay for green teas, the minerals just don't seem to work for me. It just started to taste too stony, too clay-like. I didn't like the combination of these minerals with the green teas, both Japanese and Chinese. Finally, we move on to white tea. Again, I did not think that there was any particular clay that suited white tea perfectly. If you were going to pick one, I would pick the Jianshui or the Chaozhou. Yixing lost too much of the brightness. Tokoname had a mismatch of minerals. Jianshui, again, the theme is here. The Jianshui gives a nice, sweet, transparent brew. So it took what you get from a white tea from your porcelain, and it just thickened it and made it a little bit sweeter, whilst kind of shaving off some of the top notes. And the Chaozhou added minerality, but again, the tea that I was drinking was from Fujian province. and the minerals seemed to match. So there you go. These were the tests that I did, and I hope you can understand why I didn't do this in the video, because it would have taken a long time. It took many, many hours of tasting. So when we compare the chart that I've just shown you with the chart of brewing temperatures and brewing heat retention for different types of tea, we can start to bring those two factors together, and we can start to talk about some general pointers for which teas brew best in which types of clay. Check this chart out. So I've taken the Yixing Zisha, the Jianshui, the Chaozhou, and the Tokoname. I've split the square or the rectangle in half. The left-hand side is referring to what we talked about before, which was heat retention. The right-hand side is what we were talking about just now, which is the mineral shaping of the tea. So you can see double greens means all good. Brewing temperature, heat retention is good, and the mineral shaping is very good. Yellows is not so good, but still pretty good. Then you've got browns and you've got those pinks and purples. So you can see, PuErh, for me, I would suggest brewing in Yixing Zisha or Jianshui, but Yixing Zisha comes out on top for me. For ripe PuErh tea, again, I would say brewing in Yixing Zisha or Jianshui. For me, Jianshui comes out on top. Black teas, I don't think that there's any particular clay type which is optimum for it, but if you wanted to brew black teas in clay, then you would select from either Jianshui, Chaozhou or Tokoname clay. For Wui rock oolongs, yenchas, I think that Jianshui is really, really good. I think that Chaozhou is a close second place though, depending if you want something that's a little bit more mineral rich. Moving on to dansongs, clear winner for me here. The Chaozhou clay definitely is the best in terms of mineral matching and heat retention, followed by the Tokoname clay. Green oolongs, I don't think that there's any particular clay which works very well for green oolongs, but if you were going to select one, I would choose between the Jianshui and the Chaozhou. Green teas, Chinese green teas, I would go for Tokoname, and Japanese green teas, I would go for Tokoname, but you can brew it in Jianshui, and for Japanese green teas in Chaozhou. And finally, white teas, I think the best is Jianshui, followed by either the Yixing or the Chaozhou. And if you look at this chart and you start to pick out all of the different green ticks and the brown ticks there, you can see some general themes here. If you are buying a clay pot specifically for green teas, I would go for Tokoname clay. If you are buying clayware specifically for raw PuErh teas and ripe PuErh teas and really focusing on that style of tea, I would invest in a Yixing Zisha. However, if you are looking more for an all-star teapot, something that is going to give you versatility, then I would say that these two guys here are the ones to go for. Either a Chaozhou Red clay or a Jianshui clay. You can see that they have the most amount of ticks in them compared to all the other types of clay. The differences between them, I would say, if you're more focused, let's say, on lighter teas, you're more interested in lighter dansongs, lighter oolongs, maybe kind of green teas, but you still want to brew PuErh potentially in it, then Chaozhou, I would say, is the way to go. If you're looking more predominantly towards those ripe PuErhs, raw PuErhs, those rock oolongs, and you still want to brew a little bit of, let's say, some dansong occasionally or a little bit of white tea, I would go for Jianshui. These two clay types are the most versatile. I hope that this video has given you some general pointers in the differences between these types of clay. I know that there's a lot of information to take in. Of course, every pot is different, every tea is different, and every body is different in terms of their taste. So, you've got to do your own experiments. This is just some guidelines because I've been asked so many times. And once again, a reminder, if you feel that you like the mineral shaping quality of a clay, but you don't think that the brewing heat retention is right for that tea, then just get a cup. Or get a pot and a cup, and you can start to play around with different teas and start to feel the softening effects without having to brew in that clay. That's it, tea heads. If you made it to the end of this video, then make sure you hit it with a like. Follow us on all of our socials so you don't miss out on any news and videos from Mayleaf HQ. If you're ever in London, then come visit us in Camden to say hi and taste our wares. If you have any questions, comments, or video ideas, then please fire them over. Other than that, I'm Don from Mayleaf. Thank you for being a part of the revelation of true tea. Stay away from those tea bags. Keep drinking the good stuff and spread the word, because nobody deserves bad tea. Bye.